Okay, well, happy Thursday, everybody. I see we're getting a whole lot of gardeners coming on for our second Grow This Throwdown Thursday. Today, I'm going to be talking about soil testing. I hope most of you chimed in last week and got to hear about the setting your garden goals that my coworker set forth. So this is kind of a logical next step. My name is Emily Morrow. I am the extension agent in Jefferson County. So hopefully we have some other Jefferson County folks here that can help get us some nice points. So soil testing is one of my most favorite things to talk about. I do a lot of education on it because I have a background in soil science. And if you have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. I'll have a couple places that we can stop and that we can make sure everybody is following along with what we're saying. So if you guys know how to use your little fun things in Zoom, give me like a thumbs up or some sort of reaction if you've ever taken a soil test before. Hopefully it's not a lot of you, so then you can all go take a soil test and we can say that you are super educated in the subject. I personally have been getting a lot of calls about this right now, so it's a very good time to be able to take a soil sample. So why do we take a soil sample? A soil sample is going to determine your soil's nutrients, whether you're growing a lawn, a garden, fruit trees, or even an agronomic crop like corn, wheat, soybeans, hay, pasture. The soil test is kind of getting our baseline of what the nutrients are going to be and what we might need to make amendments for in the upcoming growing season in order to have our most profitable and most flourishing crop. Our soil sample collects the average of the soil nutrients, and we're going to get into that on how we take a good soil sample to get a true average. But it provides fertilizer recommendations if you need them based on what you are trying to grow. And we'll get into that when we talk about how to fill out the form and how to fill out, how to interpret the results. So when you take a soil sample, it's really important to use clean tools. You want to take a soil sample to the proper depth. I think most of us on here are gardeners, so that proper depth is going to be 6 to 8 inches. The reason we say it's 6 to 8 inches is because that's the rooting depth that most of our garden crops are. That's going to cover not only your tomatoes, but your things like your potatoes or your radishes or your carrots that might be root crops and growing underneath the ground. If you are taking a soil sample for something like a lawn, or a pasture, or even if we have any farmers on here that grow hay, 2 to 4 inches is what we recommend to that depth. And that is because that's where most grasses grow their roots, down to about 2 to 4 inches. So when we take a soil sample, it's important to try to get an even slice. I don't know how many of you dig a lot of holes. I dig a lot of holes. You normally dig a hole, it kind of creates this V shape over here, like number 2 in my image on the slide. You just end up, if you were to just throw all of that into the bucket where you're collecting a soil sample, you're going to get a really uneven distribution of what's in the top 3 inches versus what's in the bottom. So you can use a soil probe, like here under where it's labeled number 1. Your county extension office probably has one of those you could borrow. We have several. Again, I take a lot of soil samples. I rent mine out to community members. I require a deposit, which you get back when you return the tool to me. I've had a couple walk off, and that keeps them coming back and keeps them coming back unscathed. Your county extension office might be a little different. But if you want to use one of these, if you're sampling a lot, it's a really great tool to make easy work of the situation. Otherwise, most of us have a garden spade laying around, and that's a good tool to be able to get a good soil sample, especially for a garden. So I would recommend digging your hole down to your proper depth, your 6 to 8 inches, and then you're going to actually back your shovel up about 1/2 inch to 1 inch and get a nice even cross section of soil. I actually tell people it looks almost like a little slice of cake. Just like you're at the world's saddest birthday party and you're getting a nice slice of cake of soil. This kind of replicates what that soil probe is going to do. You're going to nice even distribution of the top inches versus the very bottom. And soil nutrients can vary a little bit as you get a little further down. So if you are sampling a garden, You want to take 7 to 10 samples for each soil test. If you have multiple garden areas, you're going to send in multiple samples, and you're going to do this across multiple, you're going to send in multiple samples and have multiple forms. And I'm going to get into that a little bit. This is an example of what I'm talking about when I say that cake slice. This is a example of a soil sample to about 6 to 8 inches that I took using a soil probe. So you want to try to replicate this if you're using a spade. So there's a lot of different ways to take a soil sample. I do a lot of larger fields in addition to helping homeowners. So I know some of us are just really systematic in our personalities. So I get questions on what's the right way to take a soil sample. Well, there's lots of different strategies. Maybe you're a systematic person. Maybe you just want to take samples at certain points and make it nice and even across your garden. I'm a zigzagger. I don't like to cross across the field twice. So I kind of move across my area where I take a sample in a zigzag pattern. So again, you're trying to get an average of nutrients. So if you all remember statistics, you know that the more samples you take, the better. Maybe you are just a chaotic person and you just want to take it super, super randomly. That's fine too. We're getting an average where the more samples we take, the better it is. However, there is one way to take a soil sample that's incorrect, and that's by only taking one in your garden. So we call this the wrong way. So please don't do it. To visualize exactly what that's going to look like, you're taking your multiple samples. So you're digging your multiple holes, you're taking your multiple little cake slice of soil, and you're putting them all into a nice clean black plastic bucket. You're going to remove anything that's not soil, a little bit of plant residue, maybe got some rocks, maybe you got a few bugs in there, anything that's not soil you're going to want to take out. We don't need to send that to the lab. You don't need to pay to mail rocks up to the lab either. And that's going to be one soil sample called your composite garden soil sample. Now, if you have another area, you'll move on and you'll do the same process, your 7 to 10, mix them together, and then you have a different composite. Say maybe you have a large tomato patch or a sweet corn patch. Maybe you want to sample your lawn. Maybe you want to sample your tree fruit or your brambles. So those would all, we recommend those to be separate samples because they have separate nutrient needs. If you are just a run-of-the-mill home gardener, you have a diversified mix of crops, maybe your garden is about 200 square feet every year, you can just put them all together into one. But if you're seeing any really bad issues in your garden, sometimes you see things, maybe that side's just not growing very well, you might want to send in a separate sample just to see if there's some outlier that's making your nutrients not do so great. Once you have your composite garden soil sample, you're going to let it air dry. Then you're going to fill out your sample form, and from your composite, you're going to have approximately 1 cup that you'll mail to the lab at WVU in Morgantown. Is everybody following along with me so far? Are there any questions in the chat so far?
There was one question. Someone said that they throw their wood stove ashes in the garden, and when should they put sulfur on the ground to acidify it?
Well, we'll talk about that at the very end.
Okay.
We do also have links to the soil test form, as well as the beginning gardener soil test fact sheet and video are in the chat as well. And then the main soil test page is just soiltesting.wvu.edu for your reference for later. But they're at the very top of the chat if you'd like to copy any of that.
And this is an example of what that form looks like. Jody put those links in the chat, but it is a fillable PDF. They really, really like if you type it in. I'm sure, as you can imagine, handwriting, things often are difficult to read, and your results come through email. So it's really easy to be able to mistranslate a number or a letter if you're handwriting it in. So this just kind of expedites that process at the lab. The top third of the form is your information. It's your name, your address, your email, and your phone. Like I said, your results are going to come through email. The middle third of the form is your soils information. And there's a few different drop-down forms where you'll select the information as it is applicable to you. Your county. We ask for your county because your county extension office also receives a copy of your results. Your crop code. Those crop codes are listed on the back of the form, which I'll get to in the next slide. your soil texture code, that's also listed in the back of the form, which I'll talk about on the next slide. Your tillage code, again, those codes are also listed on the back of the form. And then down here, kind of in the middle of the page, are a few extra questions. Now, a basic analysis is free, but there is a few extra steps you can take that do charge. And I'm going to talk about those once we get later into the presentation. So this is the back of the form, the second page, where you have all those different crop codes. This has been a relatively recent addition. If you've gotten a soil sample and it's been at least 5 years or so, we didn't used to ask for all of these. So if you are more of a, or maybe you're expanding your production, you're wanting to grow a little bit more specialty crops, and you just want to get soil tests just for your peas, well, you can go ahead and put that crop code in, and it'll give you a fertilizer recommendation just for your peas or your cucumbers or your eggplants. I think most people here are going to be kind of in this area. You're going to be wanting to sample a home vegetable garden, which is code HO1, maybe an established lawn and turf, maybe an orchard or a vineyard, or maybe you're even down here for blueberries, brambles, azaleas, and rhododendrons, all those different things. So I actually get a lot of questions on soil testing. So I have kind of common questions already ready to go to type into emails to folks. What do I put for sample ID? If you see on the third page of the soil test form where I instruct you to put your soils information, this is just something that's going to help you remember where your sample came from. If you're sending up 5 different forms, you want to have 5 different sample IDs. Maybe that's your garden, your lawn, your blueberry patch, and your flower bed, as an example. Your soil texture, another question I get a whole lot. Can't say with 100% certainty without touching it, but I can say with about 90% confidence, most places in West Virginia, your topsoil texture is a silt loam. And believe it or not, this actually does make a difference for your fertilizer recommendations. A clay textured soil is going to hold and distribute fertilizers a little bit differently than a silt textured soil. So your fertilizer recommendations might change just a little bit. So I recommend definitely putting the proper texture code down. If it's not a silt loam, it's probably something very, very similar, like a silty clay loam. There is a flow chart you can use. It's kind of a messy activity, recommended doing outside with kids or grandkids, pretty fun, that you can determine that yourself. But if you are wanting to know that basic information, that's definitely what it is, or what I would say it is. What is my soil series? So this is going to depend on your address. If you guys are gardeners, so you're probably familiar that there's a lot of different plants in, say, the mint family. Well, there's a lot of different soils that are in similar soil families too, that all have names and different properties. We use this information when we're testing things like hay, pasture, corn, wheat, soybeans, because we can give a more accurate yield for those different types of crops if we know what your soil series is. We can't give you a yield for a home vegetable garden because we don't really know what you're growing. We don't know if it's all tomatoes. We don't know if it's all, if it's a mixture of different crops. So this will not impact your results if you're testing a home vegetable garden. If you do want to know what it is, feel free to reach out to your county agent. And then what about those extra paid analysis, of which there are 3? Organic matter, electrical conductivity, and micronutrients. Most of you are probably familiar with organic matter. If you are looking into paying for one of those, that one is $6 and you can pay for it online. If you are really focused on building your soil's fertility, I think that's a really good one to go ahead and get as a baseline. Electrical conductivity is a measure of the salt content in the soil. Unless you are growing under a high tunnel exclusively and your soil is never getting exposed to rainfall, I would not recommend doing that one, especially if this is your first soil test. There's a micronutrient analysis too. So those nutrients that are required in smaller doses by the plant, not necessarily being less important. That's about $3 as well. You can get those tested too. I don't see a whole lot of those, but it is an analysis that's available to you. So getting your soil to the lab. The basic analysis is free. Your only cost is the postage to get it there, or if you want one of those extra things we just talked about. The results take about 2 weeks. Now, during really peak periods, it can take about a month. If a lot of people are sending in results, like at the end of the growing season or at the starting of the growing season, you're going to expect to wait a little bit longer. I highly recommend people let your sample air dry before you mail it in, because otherwise you're just paying to mail water to Morgantown. And once it gets there, it still has to dry, so it just takes a little bit longer. I usually either will leave my sample in the bag and I'll open it up and let it dry out in a garage or a basement, or if I have a lot of soil, I will lay it out on like a trash bag, and if I want it to dry a little quicker, and I'll spread it out on a trash bag or something. So then it's easier for me to put it back in the sample bag when it's dry and I'm ready to mail it in. So a soil analysis. This is what one looks like when you get it back through your email. Your information as you put it in is going to be up here at the top. Your results are going to be down here in the middle third of the page. And then your recommendations are going to be down at the very bottom. And now we're going to dissect this a little bit further. So I'm leaving out the top information because that's just what you put it in. So when I get calls from folks and they want to know how to interpret these results, I tell them to look at that colorful, beautiful chart and think of your soil as a bank account. And what that chart is telling you is, do you have enough money in your bank account to pay your bills this coming season? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. So if you have enough money, your charts are going to be blue, they're going to be green, and your nutrients are going to read optimum or excess. That's just as simple as it sounds. Optimum means you have a much and then some, and excess, you have way more than you need to get you through the growing season. And anything above that 100 and that relative sufficiency means your bank account's in the positive. If you are below that line, your chart's colors are going to be not so pretty. They're going to be red and they're going to be orange. They're going to read like deficient or medium levels. And that means that you don't have enough money in your bank account to get you through the next season. And you're going to need to add a little bit of money, meaning a little bit of nutrients. So those fertilizer recommendations at the very, very bottom are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nitrogen is applied based on the crop you are growing. So nitrogen, we do not test with a basic soil test because nitrogen moves within the soil, and it's very difficult to test accurately, and we can't really do it with a free analysis. So your notes page, which I thought I put in the slide, but I didn't, but I can pull up a sample analysis and we can delve into that a little bit more. Your second page of your soil test is going to have recommendation notes. Nitrogen is, so if you are growing something like peas or beans that fixate nitrogen into the soil, you don't need to add any for the upcoming season. Things like potatoes or sweet corn or peppers that need nitrogen to keep growing, that's when you're going to get a recommendation there. Phosphorus is going to be based on the crop that you put in. In this case, we are testing for a home vegetable garden, and that's going to be based on your soil's current bank account up in that chart right above it. In this case, we have enough money in that bank account, so we don't need anything more. Potassium is going to be the same way, applied based on the crop that you put in and your soil's current balance. This soil test is a good example on one that's not going to give you the one that's ready for the upcoming growing season. A couple other things to note about the soil test form is right here. I'm going to try to draw on this. I'm not a very good drawer, but hopefully everybody can see that I have circled right below where it says PK, calcium, magnesium. It says PSAT, and it's in terms of a percentage. The value is a percent, and the rating is medium. This means how much phosphorus you already have in your soil and your soil's susceptibility to leaching phosphorus out of your soil. So this soil in particular already has enough for the upcoming growing season, and it's reading as medium, meaning my soil is not really going to benefit if I add phosphorus. I don't need it either. I see this level reading as high for a lot of home gardeners. And the reason why is because a lot of you use compost and you apply compost pretty regularly at the end of the growing season. So if you are a seasoned gardener, I would not be surprised that you get your soil test results back. Everything's in the blue and your phosphorus saturation reads excess, high. So that means you don't need to apply anything. There's nothing you can do to get rid of it. There's nothing you can do to lower that rating besides just foregoing applying any nutrients and just planting as you would for the upcoming growing season. I had a conversation with one of our master gardeners about this, that she just didn't need to apply any compost for a few seasons, and we'll just retest and see where it comes after that. I don't know how to get rid of that. So someone asked a question about applying additives. So a soil test is going to be a good recommendation that's going to give you if your pH is too high or if it's too low, like right here. Your optimum pH is going to be 6.2 to 6.8. If your pH is lower than that, you're going to get a recommendation for adding lime. If your pH is higher than that, significantly higher, you might get a recommendation for adding sulfur. You can apply those things at any time of the year. You can apply it, and it takes a while for those lime or sulfur, whichever way you need to move your pH, to fully react within the soil. So you might not see results for 6 months to 12 months to 24 months, depending on what type of lime you're using, depending on what type of sulfur that you're using. Sulfur reacts a little bit quicker. We generally don't need to bring our pH down that much. So we have a limestone parent material over here in the panhandle, so our pHs tend to run just a little bit higher. When it comes to other nutrients, if you're adding something like compost, we recommend adding it at the end of the growing season because they're slow release nutrients, and it's going to give time for that to decompose and work its way into the soil and feed all the healthy little organisms that make their home there. If you're adding something like nitrogen in the form of urea, so commercially available nitrogen, your best bet is to apply it in the beginning of the growing season, and then if you need a lot, you want to apply it again mid-season as well. So I'm going to go ahead and stop share so I can bring up the soil test page, and if there's any questions. Now would be a good time to catch up on that. So this is the landing page. That is my face. Do not sign a media release form with the university. They will put this picture up here and they will use it for the next 8 years. So all these tabs up here at the beginning is going to give you your soil test form. Just the form that I've showed you, but it is a drop-down menu. A fillable PDFs, you would just type in your information and make sure you want to fill in all of these. One thing I didn't mention is size of sample area. If your garden is 1/10 of an acre and you put in that it's 0.1 acres, you're going to get results in pounds per acre. That might not be a really usable format for you when it comes to fertilizer. So I recommend if your garden is anything less than 1/2 an acre, or anything less than 1/4 of acre rather, doing square feet. Make sure that these are also filled in. They just drops right down. Soil texture as well. I do see several forms that don't necessarily fill this in. If your garden is no-till versus if it's conventional. And then if you want any of these extra analysis, that's where you will check these. And what I do when I send in samples that use these is I go to this link right here, I pay for it, and then I put my receipt in with my soil sample. So there's no question of anybody needing to go and look up if I've paid for that analysis or not. So it is a pretty simple form. This is where you would name your soil sample. And when you're sending in results, I recommend to folks putting on the bag, just a standard Ziploc bag is fine. You only need about a cup full of soil, your last name, and what you wrote in sample ID. So if you're sending in 5 samples, and you put garden here, I would write Morrow Garden on that bag, and I would attach this form to the bag with a rubber band or a staple in some way. And then if I'm also sending in one for our hayfield, I might name this creek bottom field or something that helps me remember where it came from, and I would do the same. I would write that on the bag, and I would attach the sample form to the bag. So when it gets to the lab, everything is nice and even and neat, and you don't have to worry about a sample being misplaced. So they get a whole lot of samples. Now, like I mentioned, your county agent also gets a copy of this form. There's some other helpful information on the website that Jody put this link into the chat, like your mailing instructions, how to texture your own soil, and a few guides on how to read your own report. When it comes to making fertilizer calculations, that would take me like a whole hour to overview that. So my recommendation is to reach out to your local county agent. It's also super helpful for your agent to understand what type of fertilizer you're planning to use. Maybe it's a compost, maybe it's something you bought commercially. So that information helps us churn out those recommendations really quickly for you. So that is the meat and potatoes of what I had today. I'll put up my contact information to folks and we can go to questions.
We will be discussing fertilizing your garden on April the 4th. Emily, I think we did have just a couple of questions. One person asked, could their child bring the sample to you when they come to WVU at this after spring break? I assume they mean take it to the lab.
Yes, the lab is located in the new Agriculture Sciences building. I can't remember if it's on the 3rd floor or on the 1st floor, but you can drop off samples directly to the lab if you're nearby. There's usually a box or something outside.
Someone else asked where they could find the activity for soil textures.
Oh, that is also on the website. There is a flow chart. I'm going to pop the link in the chat. Mira says lab's on the 1st floor.
Yep.
So the activity to do your own soil texture, it's just you're like making a nice little mud pie. It's really fun. I'd like to do it with kids and adults. And it just guides you by feel on how to determine your soil's texture. But I'll say it's probably a silt loam, which is our code word for today, or code words.
And I just stuck the link to the survey in the chat. So you'll want to do that and then use the code word that Emily just mentioned when you're filling that out. Oh, I think I accidentally sent it as a direct message. Someone had direct messaged me. Hold on. I'll put it in the chat now. Okay. There we go.
Someone else asked if you could explain the cost again.
The basic analysis is free. You are responsible for the postage to get it to the lab in Morgantown. If you want any additional analyses, there's 3 of those. There is organic matter percentage. There is electrical conductivity, which is more geared towards commercial high tunnel growers. So people growing under a structure, and there is micronutrients as well. Those have a cost associated with them, but the basic analysis is free.
And how do you feel about home testers or digital testers?
They are not accurate. I do not recommend them.
And
you can buy like home pH readers, and I've had growers use those and they get readings that are completely all over the place, and then we send it into the lab and find it's completely different.
And someone asked when they can start sending soil samples. It's just anytime, right? Anytime.
You can send samples at any time of the year. That's correct. We recommend, if you are going to sample your area routinely, to send it in at the same time every year. So if you always send it in the spring, just keep sending it into the spring. Nutrients can vary just a little bit dependent on if it's in the spring or the fall based on rainfall and some other factors. So we just recommend to take it around the same time every year.
Keely, there's a problem with the survey if they took the one last week. Emily, they have questions about if they don't understand their soil test, can their county agent help?
Yes, that is correct. Well, I'm actually pulling up a sample, the sample that I use in this presentation. So the first page this is the same sample. The first page is just as I showed it to you on the slides, but the second page is, when you scroll down, some notes, some recommendation notes. At the bottom is going to list your county agent with their phone number and their email. If you don't have an agriculture agent in your county, I believe it directs to the one that is closest to you, or it might have a different agent listed on that form. But these notes also give you a little bit more information, and particularly for gardeners, we send in a soil sample with the crop code home gardens, so we know it's going to be a hodgepodge of nutrients, so your recommendations follow that. They give you some recommendations on nitrogen, like legume garden crops do not need any nitrogen. Some gardeners prefer to add some nitrogen into cool weather. It gives you recommendations right on the form on when to apply some of that and how much. Now, it's important to understand with fertilizer that when you buy a bag of fertilizer, it's not 100% that fertilizer. So unfortunately, there's a little bit of math involved, which is why I recommend reaching out to your agent, maybe with an idea of what fertilizer you want to use, even if that is just like your own home compost. And we can give you a more accurate recommendation on, okay, you're growing pumpkins. They are a light nitrogen user. They don't need a whole lot. You're using this type of fertilizer, exactly how much ounces or pounds wise you might need to think about applying to your garden. That is a really, really long, I do this type of program for very different audiences, and that can take like 30 minutes in itself just to explain. So for time reasons, we're not going to get into that. I think Jody said there's going to be a follow-up session on fertilizer calculations.
Yeah, on April 4th, we're going to talk more about fertilizer with Brian Sparks. And I think he'll mention the calculations, like 10-10-10 is 10% of each, but I'm not sure how much calculating he will get into just because it is a little more complicated than a lot of beginners are interested in. You do have a couple more questions before we go. One is about container gardening and whether or not you should still do soil testing with container gardens.
Yes, I do recommend container gardens. You can treat them like it's their own garden space, especially if fertilizer wise they've been treated the same. Now, for example, if you have maybe maybe you have 5 raised beds, and maybe what you can sample your raised beds separately, individually. So raised bed 1, maybe you grew tomatoes in it this year. Last year, and maybe this year you're growing peas in it. So you can sample them separately. If they've been treated the same or they've been growing crops with similar nutrient needs, you can just sample them all